For 6 long months, I told our kids their mother left us. That night in the attic, I found out I'd been the one who left first. I just hadn't noticed I was gone. The attic smelled like dust and old cardboard, a single bare bulb swinging faintly overhead every time I shifted my weight against the creaking floorboards beneath me. Boxes sat half-sorted all around me, Rachel's careful handwriting still visible on the sides of most of them. Labels she'd written years ago, and I'd never once needed to read closely until tonight. I sat with a worn cloth-bound diary open on my knee, one I'd found tucked beneath a stack of old tax records, and beside it, fallen loose from between 2 worn pages, a folded anniversary card I recognized instantly and understood nothing about yet. I hadn't meant to start reading that night at all. I told myself I was simply sorting boxes for the estate sale we hadn't quite admitted we needed yet, that I'd just glance at a page or two out of curiosity before setting it aside with the other things that were clearly still hers. The attic had gone fully dark outside its small window by the time I noticed how long I'd actually been sitting there. Somewhere around the 4th entry, sorting had stopped being the point at all. I had no idea the hardest conversation of my life wasn't going to be with Rachel. It was going to be with myself. 8 months earlier, none of that quiet attic scene existed yet. At least, not in any way that mattered to anyone. Just an ordinary version of my life that I'd already, quietly, started rewriting into something easier to live inside. My name is Thomas Riley, though everyone around here just calls me Tom. I'm 56 years old now, a mid-level actuary here in Columbus, married to Rachel for 28 full years, father to Megan, 27, and Chris, 24. For 8 months, I told anyone who asked, including myself, a fairly simple version of how the marriage ended, one I'd repeated so often it had worn smooth around the edges. Rachel grew restless somewhere in her 50s. She left abruptly, no real warning I could point to, citing something about needing space to figure out who I am. I told people I hadn't changed anything about how I showed up in that marriage. Same man at 56 that I'd been at 28. I believed all of that completely. The way you believe things you've repeated often enough that they stop feeling like a story you're telling and start feeling like simple, uncontested fact. Rachel had kept a diary, on and off, for over 15 years. I knew about it vaguely. The way you know about a drawer in your own house you've simply never opened. I'd seen the worn cloth cover once or twice over the years, tucked into her nightstand beneath a stack of old paperbacks, and I never once read a page of it. Not out of restraint exactly, just a quiet, uncomplicated belief that it was hers, and none of my business. The same way I never read her mail or checked her phone. I'd spent those 8 months nursing a particular kind of self-pity. The comfortable sort. The kind that lets you feel wronged without ever needing to examine anything closely. I'd been steady, reliable, unremarkable in all the ways I considered virtues rather than warnings. I paid the mortgage on time for 28 years. I never raised my voice, never had an affair, never missed a birthday if I could help it. I genuinely believed, right up until that night in the attic, that I'd been an entirely blameless husband. The kind of man other men's wives held up as an example. Steady, undramatic, easy to be married to. That Thursday evening, right around dinner time, my phone rang. Megan. "Dad," she said, her voice careful in a way I'd grown used to over the past several months, ever since her mother left. "Chris and I want to come by Sunday, just to check on you and talk about Mom a little, if that's okay with you." The entry that stopped me longest that whole first week was dated 12 years earlier, an ordinary Tuesday in March that I would never have remembered on my own if her handwriting hadn't insisted I sit with it. Rachel had been laid off that day. A company restructuring that had nothing to do with her performance and everything to do with a spreadsheet somewhere far above her. The kind of decision made by people who'd never once met her. She wrote about coming home badly shaken, not over the job itself, but over a question the layoff had cracked open in her that she hadn't expected. "Who am I?" she'd written, "when nobody actually needs me for anything specific?" I sat with our own daughter's homework, our son's dentist appointments, your dry cleaning, and I don't know what's underneath all of it anymore. I think I've been afraid to find out for a long time. She wrote that she'd tried to tell me that evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen table while I ate the dinner she'd made anyway despite the day she'd had, her hands still shaking slightly, she noted, as she reached for her own fork. I remembered the conversation only vaguely before reading this. A soft, forgettable exchange I'd filed away decades ago as nothing in particular. Her diary remembered it entirely differently, in far greater and more painful detail than I ever had. I told her, tired from a long, ordinary day myself, "You're overthinking it, you'll figure it out," and turned the television back on before she'd finished the sentence I now realized she'd worked up considerable courage to say out loud. Tucked into that exact page, I found the anniversary card, the paper gone soft at the creases from however many times she must have opened it over the years. I'd given it to her that same year, the inscription in my own handwriting reading, to 20 more years of us. Reading it now, in the same entry, describing the night I'd turned away from her instead of toward her, I understood something I hadn't let myself see in 12 years. I'd meant that inscription completely the day I wrote it, sitting at this same kitchen table, feeling genuinely lucky. I simply stopped actively making that promise sometime not long after that particular Tuesday, a little more each year, without ever once noticing I had. I skimmed several more entries after that, years apart, each one describing some version of the same pattern repeating itself quietly across a decade. Rachel reaching, carefully, quietly, testing whether it was safe to say more. Me deflecting, gently, without cruelty, without ever once naming what was actually happening between us. Always certain in the moment that I was simply being reasonable, tired, ordinary. I closed the diary a little after midnight that night, telling myself firmly that I'd stop reading for good. 20 quiet minutes later, sitting alone in the dark, I opened it again anyway. The following days moved strangely. Ordinary tasks continuing around me almost against my will. Groceries bought, emails answered. Small talk managed at the office without anyone noticing anything different about me, while some quieter part of me kept living entirely inside the pages I read each night after the house went dark, and I finally had the privacy to fall apart a little. The first entry that truly stopped me was from 6 years ago, describing a dinner I remembered slightly better than the Tuesday in March, mostly because I remembered laughing. Rachel had tried, carefully, over a meal at the Italian place we used to go to for birthdays, the one with the red, checkered tablecloths Megan used to love as a kid, to tell me she'd started feeling like a fixture in my life instead of a person in it. She wrote that she'd rehearsed the sentence carefully in the car beforehand, worried it would sound overly dramatic even to her own ears, practicing it quietly in the parking lot before we finally went in. According to her account, I laughed, not unkindly, the way you laugh at something you assume is an exaggeration, and told her she was being dramatic. She wrote that she smiled and let it go, the way she'd apparently learned to do by then, and ordered dessert like nothing had happened at all. While inside, by her own account, something had quietly closed a little further that night. The second entry was from 3 years ago, after she'd quietly started seeing a therapist on her own, something I genuinely never knew about until that week, a fact that stung nearly as much as anything else written on the page itself. She wrote about a session where her therapist asked plainly whether she'd ever told me directly how unseen she felt in our marriage, a question Rachel apparently sat with quietly for a long moment before finally answering it honestly. Rachel's answer, written in her own steady hand, landed harder than almost anything else in that diary. "I have told him," she wrote. "He just doesn't experience it as being told, because nothing ever changes after." I sat with that sentence a long time, turning it over in the quiet of the kitchen, understanding slowly that she wasn't describing a failure to communicate at all. She was describing 20-some years of communicating clearly to someone who simply never registered it as information worth acting on. Someone who mistook her calm, measured delivery for the total absence of any real urgency underneath it. The third entry, the most recent one in the entire diary, was dated just over a year before she left, tucked near the very last pages that still held any handwriting at all. I found myself reading it at nearly 2 a.m, the house silent around me, everyone in it long asleep except me, the only light in the room the small lamp beside the bed we used to share. She wrote that she wasn't leaving because she'd stopped loving me, a distinction she underlined carefully twice, as though she'd anticipated someone might need real convincing of it later. She wrote that she'd finally understood staying required her to keep quietly disappearing, a little more each year, shrinking herself down to fit whatever space was left over once everyone else's needs had been accounted for, and that she wasn't willing to keep doing that for one more decade of anniversaries she no longer fully believed in. I kept mistaking her quiet for peace, right up until the exact day I finally read what that quiet had actually cost her all along. Sitting there at 2 a.m, diary open in my lap, the pages gone slightly warped from years of handling, I finally understood something plainly, without any room left to argue myself out of it. The story I'd told our children for 8 months, that their mother grew restless and left abruptly, without sufficient reason, was never true. It had simply been the version that let me keep believing I was the wronged party in a story that had actually been building, quietly, patiently, for over a decade before she ever packed a single box, a decade I now realized I'd spent narrating entirely and only to myself. My phone buzzed on the nightstand beside me, a calendar reminder cutting sharply through the heavy silence of the room. Megan and Chris arriving for dinner in exactly 2 days. I sat alone at my own kitchen table for a long while after that. The diary now closed in front of me, my hands resting flat down on either side of it the same familiar way they'd rested there together on countless quiet, ordinary evenings over 28 long years, back when I still genuinely believed I understood every truly important thing about my own life. I thought about the version of events I'd let our children believe, that their mother had grown restless and left abruptly, selfishly, without sufficient reason, a version I'd repeated to Megan over coffee, to Chris over the phone, to my own brother, to neighbors who asked carefully how I was holding up, to myself, most of all, late at night when the house felt too quiet to argue with. I'd never once set out to lie to any of them. That was the part that took the longest to sit with, turning it over and over again the way you turn over a stone looking for the smooth side. I'd built that story the same honest, blind way I'd lived the entire marriage, without malice, without any real awareness that I was doing it at all. The exact same pattern the diary had just spent 400 pages patiently, quietly documenting back to me. I wasn't ready to call Rachel yet, not that particular night. Whatever I owed her, I understood I needed to earn the right to say it properly first. Instead, I called my younger brother, Pete, the only person in my life who'd ever been reliably, sometimes uncomfortably honest with me about anything, even the things I clearly hadn't wanted him to be honest about at the time. "I think I need to tell the kids the actual truth about their mother," I said, the words coming out rougher and shakier than I'd intended them to. "And I don't know how to do it without falling apart in front of them." Pete was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that meant he was actually thinking, not just waiting for his turn to talk. "Are you doing this for them?" he asked finally, his voice gentle but not soft, not letting me off easy. "Or because you finally can't stand carrying the lie yourself anymore?" I didn't answer him right away at all. Over the following 2 days, I didn't rehearse a single sentence of what I might say to Megan and Chris. Rehearsing felt like the wrong kind of preparation, the sort that would leave me polished and defended rather than honest. The kind of speech a man gives when he's more interested in managing how he's perceived than in actually telling the truth. Instead, I did something considerably harder. I started the diary over from the very first entry and read it straight through, chronologically this time, forcing myself to sit with all 28 years in the order she'd actually lived them, rather than the isolated, wounding pages I'd been circling and rereading for the better part of a week. Reading it that way changed something fundamental in how I understood it. The early entries were lighter, full of small, ordinary happiness. A young marriage figuring itself out, one clumsy year at a time. The shift happened so gradually across the years that no single entry could have told the whole story on its own. It took reading all of it, carefully, in sequence, to see the slow accumulation clearly, the way you can only see a tide slowly going out if you watch it long enough, rather than checking the shoreline once, drawing a conclusion from it. Near the very back, tucked behind the final dated entry, I found something I hadn't noticed my first time through, half hidden between the last written page and the diary's own back cover. A letter, folded twice, written the week she'd actually moved out, addressed not to herself the way every other page had been, but directly to me. She'd never sent it. I don't know if she ever intended to, or whether writing it had simply been its own kind of necessary act, separate from whether it ever reached me at all. In it, she wrote that she hoped, someday, once enough time had passed and enough anger had settled, I might understand that none of this had ever been punishment. It was self-preservation, she wrote, the only kind she had left available to her after so many years of quietly, patiently running out of it. I read that entire quiet letter 4 times before I trusted myself to fold it back up. That evening, I called Megan, my hand hovering over the phone for a good minute before I finally pressed her name. "I was thinking," I said, trying to sound more settled than I actually felt. "Maybe I could host Sunday dinner this time instead of you two coming to check on me again." She hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the offer. "Sure, Dad, that'd be nice. Chris and I can bring dessert." "One more thing," I said, choosing the words carefully. "Could you bring the photo albums from the garage? I want to look at some things with you both. Together, all 3 of us." She was quiet for a second, clearly trying to read what was underneath the request, some instinct telling her this wasn't simply about nostalgia. "Okay," she said finally, her voice a little more careful now. "We can do that, Dad." Sunday morning, I sat at the kitchen table and arranged 3 things carefully in front of me: the diary, the folded letter, and the old anniversary card, side by side, in the exact order I intended to use them. The same table where all of this had quietly begun so many years before. I sat there a long while afterward, coffee going cold beside me, entirely unsure how I was actually going to begin. Megan and Chris arrived a little after 5, carrying a box of pastries and the photo albums from the garage, exactly as I'd asked. Both of them clearly curious but not yet suspicious about why I'd wanted the albums tonight of all nights. Dinner moved along ordinarily enough at first. The same gentle, well-meaning conversation they'd been steering toward me for months now. Reassurances dressed up as casual observation, the kind of care that had genuinely comforted me until very recently. "You seem good today, Dad," Megan said, passing the potatoes. "Better, I think." Chris nodded along. "Mom's the one who walked away from all of this. That's not something you did." I let them keep going a little longer, the same familiar comfort they'd been offering me for 8 months. Comfort I'd accepted gratefully every single time before tonight. "She left the family, Dad," Chris said finally, not unkindly, setting down his fork. "That's on her." I let him finish completely. Then I reached beside my chair and set 3 things on the table: the diary, the folded letter, and the old anniversary card, arranging them the way I'd practiced that morning without quite calling it practice. "I need to tell you both something important," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "I found your mother's diary in the attic last week. I've spent the last several days reading it, start to finish, and the story I've been telling you both for 8 months was wrong. Not a lie exactly, just wrong." Megan's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Chris frowned, uncertain. I opened the diary to the entry from 12 years ago and read it aloud, slowly, deliberately. The Tuesday she was laid off. Her fear about disappearing into everyone else's needs. My own response to her that evening. Word for word, exactly as she'd recorded it. "You're overthinking it. You'll figure it out." I watched Chris's face change as he heard the sentence, some memory of the actual evening perhaps stirring faintly in the back of his mind, young as he'd been at the time. I read the entry from 6 years later next, the dinner where she told me she felt like a fixture in my life instead of a person in it, and how I'd laughed, gently but unmistakably, at something she'd worked up the courage for weeks to finally say out loud. Then I unfolded the letter carefully, my hands not quite steady, and read it aloud, her final words, written the week she left, addressed directly to me, though she'd never actually sent it. My voice broke on the line about self-preservation rather than punishment, and I had to stop for a long moment, breathing carefully, before I trusted myself to finish it. "Your mother didn't abandon this family," I said quietly, looking steadily at both of them in turn. I spent 28 years slowly making her feel like she wasn't fully in it, without ever once meaning to, and she finally stopped waiting for me to notice. Megan sat in stunned, total silence, tears already sliding steadily down her face, her hand pressed flat against her mouth. Chris, defensive at first, shook his head slowly, his voice rising slightly before he caught himself. "Why didn't you ever say any of this before now? You let us believe—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence himself, looking down at his own hands instead. "Because I didn't know it myself until last week," I said honestly, meeting his eyes even though it cost me something to do it. "I believed every single word of the story I told you both. That's the part I have to live with now, that I believed it completely for 8 months, while your mother carried the real one alone, quietly, without ever once asking either of you to take her side against me." Nobody spoke for a long moment. The pastries sat untouched at the center of the table, the box still half open. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed steadily on, ordinary and indifferent to what had just happened in the room right beside it. Megan finally looked up at me from across the table, her eyes red and swollen now, her voice small and unsteady. "Does Mom know?" she asked quietly. "Does she know you've read all this?" I opened my mouth to answer her right away and found, for the first time all evening, that I genuinely didn't actually have one. "No," I said, answering Megan's question as honestly as I could manage. "I haven't talked to your mother about any of this yet at all. Tonight was about you two. I needed to tell you both the truth before I tried to tell her anything at all." Chris sat back in his chair, quieter now than he'd been all evening, some of the defensiveness draining slowly out of him as he stared down at his half-empty plate. "I think I took your side so completely," he said, partly because it was easier than imagining that both of you had actually failed each other, in your own separate ways. It was simpler to believe one of you was just wrong, that there was a clean answer somewhere if I just picked the right side of it. I understood that more than he probably realized in that moment. I'd been doing some version of the same thing myself for 8 months, just from the opposite direction, choosing the version of events that let me stay comfortably certain rather than genuinely honest. Megan wiped her eyes carefully, steadier now than she'd been just minutes earlier, and asked the harder question, the one I'd been quietly waiting for all evening without ever fully admitting that to myself. "What are you going to do now, Dad?" "I don't fully know yet," I admitted honestly. "I owe your mother an honest conversation, regardless of whether it changes anything between us. That part I'm sure of. Everything past that I genuinely don't know yet." They left a little after 9 that evening, both of them hugging me longer than usual at the door, Chris quietly telling me he was proud of me for finally saying any of it out loud, Megan promising to call in the morning. After the house went quiet again, I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long while, the diary and the letter still sitting exactly where I'd left them, the anniversary card resting on top like a small, unassuming period at the end of a very long sentence. Then I picked up my phone and called Rachel, my thumb hovering over her name for several seconds before I finally pressed it. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice careful, cautious in a way that had become achingly familiar over the past 8 months, the voice of 2 people who no longer quite knew how to talk to each other. "Tom?" "I read your diary," I said, my voice far more unsteady than I'd expected it to be. "I found it in the attic, going through boxes. I read all of it, Rachel, every page. I owe you a different conversation than the ones we've had so far, whenever you're actually ready for it." There was a long silence on the line, long enough that I genuinely wondered for a moment if the call had simply dropped. Finally, quietly, she answered me back. "Okay," she said, "not tonight, but okay." The months that followed didn't move toward any clean, tidy resolution, and I stopped fully expecting them to fairly early on. I started seeing a therapist of my own that fall, a quiet, unhurried woman named Dr. Marsh, who never once let me get away with the comfortable version of a story, not to save the marriage, which felt by then like the wrong reason entirely to start doing the work. I told Pete over beers one evening that I was doing it so I'd stop doing this to the next relationship if there ever was one, whatever shape that ended up eventually taking, whether with Rachel or with someone else entirely down the road. Some weeks, the sessions felt like real, tangible progress. Other weeks, I left more unsettled than when I'd arrived, turning something over for days afterward that I hadn't expected to still be carrying. Small memories surfacing at odd moments, in the shower, driving to work, standing in line at the grocery store. Rachel and I met for coffee twice that fall. Careful, honest conversations that neither rushed toward reconciliation nor closed the door on it entirely. We sat across from each other at a small table near the window each time, both of us visibly more careful with our words than we'd ever needed to be during 28 years of marriage, choosing each careful sentence the way you choose your footing on ground you're no longer entirely sure will actually hold you. We talked about the diary eventually, though never all at once, a little more each time, testing how much either of us could actually hold in a single sitting. We talked about the 12 years I'd apparently spent not noticing what I was doing, the small dismissals that had added up into something neither of us fully understood until it was already over. Neither of us pretended those conversations were easy. They weren't. Not once, not even close. Megan and Chris began, separately, rebuilding their own relationship with their mother, no longer filtered through the version of events I'd unintentionally handed them for 8 months without ever meaning any harm by it. Megan started calling Rachel every Sunday afternoon, just to talk, the way she used to before everything fell apart between us. Chris drove out to see her twice that fall. Awkward and stiff at first, then steadily, noticeably less so with each visit. I started keeping a journal of my own around then, badly, inconsistently, some weeks managing only a single page scrawled out late at night. Other weeks, nothing at all. The pages sitting blank in a way that used to bother me more than it does now. I wasn't especially good at it, not by any measure. I kept doing it anyway. 6 months after that Sunday dinner, Rachel and I met for coffee a third time, at the same small place near her new apartment we'd somehow settled into using without ever really discussing it. The kind of unspoken agreement that felt oddly comforting after so many months of everything requiring careful, explicit words. I brought the old anniversary card with me, tucked into my jacket pocket the entire drive over, and slid it carefully across the table once we'd both finished our coffee, and the conversation had reached one of its natural, quiet pauses. "I don't fully know what this means anymore," I said, watching her closely for some sign of how she'd take it. "I just didn't want to be the only one who kept it." Rachel looked at the card for a long moment, before finally picking it up, turning it over once in her hands, studying the worn, softened creases the way you study something you'd once known completely by heart, and had to slowly, painfully learn all over again from the beginning. She didn't answer me right away, not that afternoon at least. I spent 8 months being comforted by a story that made me the wronged party. It was easier that way, the kind of grief people know how to console you through. The truth, once I finally read it in her own handwriting, was harder to carry, but far more honest to actually live inside. Sometimes the person who left you didn't stop loving you. They just stopped being able to disappear quietly for you one more time. I still don't know exactly where Rachel and I are headed. Some days that uncertainty feels unbearable. Other days it just feels honest, more than I could say 8 months ago. If this story reminded you of a truth you weren't ready to read about yourself, share it in the comments. Like this video if it meant something to you, and subscribe here for more honest stories about marriage, accountability, and second chances.